All protocol observed. Ladies and gentlemen, wonderful good evening. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation Namibia, together with its team, are pleased to be hosting a public debate on the implications of the 2022-2023 National Budget Namibia. We are blessed with such a number of audience tonight in this room, an expert that will give us guidance to this crucial topic. Ladies and gentlemen, as a political foundation here in Namibia, we are committed to democracy, rule of law, good governance, and social market economy. Our work as Konrad Adenauer Foundation are underlined by the basic principle of freedom, justice, and solidarity. We believe in upholding these values throughout our continuous dialogue and networking platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, in this context, we do recognize the pressure and the need to discuss the implications of the National Budget 2022-2023 that will have impacts on various stakeholders. The budget was just tabled by the Finance Minister Ipumbu Shimi in the Parliament on the 24th of February this year. With more than a third of the current population ranging between the ages of 15 and 34, the current national budget is dedicated to the youth under the mission Reimagining a Better Future for the Youth. Lots of opinions has been shared on the subject, and we thought, what a better way to consolidate these opinions than throughout this discussion tonight. There are expectations from all sides. The education sector, the health facilities, the defense sector, different ministries, civil servant salaries, the construction sector, road maintenance, the marginalized group in the society, the economy that needs to be boosted. The list is even longer. Before we elaborate and discuss what might be said right or wrong with this budget, I think it's wise to give some knowledge and understanding. From the sense of logic, there might be no big difference between an ordinary single household budget, like mine or yours, and the state budget. Just the figures to negotiate are higher and the chain of interest are longer. Youth, and taking also in consideration the demographic dividend. The transmission of the development of renewable energy, the prominence of green hydrogen, and the need for energy security. The reform of the education system to produce what the future labor market requires, simply to cut the gap between demand and supply. Poverty, affordable housing access, social tensions within the society, and with all its impacts on GBV. On the other hand, the debt are rising, so do the interest bill, same as the inflation, mainly driven by the higher fuel prices as we all experience in these days. Simply speaking, the revenue side doesn't give so much flexibility to cover all the demands in the nation. Raising taxes might have negative impact on the economy. Given that picture, it is not much room to maneuvering. So it is quite a balancing act with this mounting expenditure. I think the key aspect is the priorities, to set it right. In fact, the question is always where the means to collect from best and where best to invest them, while carrying a huge suitcase of debt stock. An economic growth is definitely needed. Ladies and gentlemen, a debate in this nature sensitizes the public and provides an opportunity for expression of different opinions as part of contributing to the national democratic process and dispensation. In the short and the long-term perspective, opinions expressed and the narrative generated through discussions tonight aims to serve the national discourse. Ladies and gentlemen, with the assistance of our experts and your constructive participations, we are extracting the budget implications and overall impact on the various stakeholders, and also to analyze the contribution toward Namibia's national development goals and Harambee Prosperity Plan, not to forget the Vision 2030. We encourage you to share your wisdom and opinions. The national budget, with its volume of 70.8 billion Namibian dollars, is dedicated to the youth and carries the message, reimagining a better future of the youth. Let's unpack this. And to conclude, feel welcome to our discussion and let us participate and help to shape a better tomorrow for the people of Namibia through an engaging and participatory discussion on this crucial subject. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with these few words and welcoming the remarks, I wish you all an enlightening discussion, and I'm really much looking forward to your contribution. And with that, I would like to hand over then to you, Mr. Saida. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for according me this opportunity to come and share my perspectives on the national budget. Indeed, the topic is quite relevant under the circumstances, because this year's budget, just to emphasize on the words of the director, this year's budget is one of those budgets in the entire history of Namibia which drew a lot of attention. We have been having budget statement for the past 32 years, but I can assure you that this year's budget comes on top of the list because of the interest that it drew. And by this, I mean to point out that all the corners, all the constituencies of this country had an interest. They were looking forward to hear what the minister was going to say. The youth were looking forward to what the minister was going to say. What promises, what programs are there in the budget to respond to their needs and challenges? The youth are the hardest hit in terms of unemployment. The youth are the hardest hit in terms of limited opportunities this country can offer, to an extent that most of the youth are at the point of giving up and they feel more discouraged. So this budget was one of those aspects government was putting forward to the youth, and the youth were actually looking forward. It is not only the youth, the business people. We have just came from a difficult time. COVID has ravaged this economy from west to east, and the business people were not spared. And they were also looking forward, as you know, a budget is also one of the policy tool that government uses to influence macroeconomic conditions in the country. And the business community was also looking forward. Not only that, the men on the street as well, they were also not spared from the vagaries of COVID. And so they were also looking forward. What is it that the minister is going to tell us? Our pension have been on the same level for many years. When you look at the vulnerable children, the 250 has been the same for the past how many years, and inflation has been eating away from it every year. And so they were also looking forward to hear if the minister is going to increase a little bit. So you can see that this budget really covered the entire spectrum, and everyone was looking forward, and then the minister was there to present the budget. And so when the minister presented the budget, I am sure all of us were glued to the TV. But if I can go group by group to say, okay, my fellow youth, did you get what you were looking for in the budget? I am sure I'm going to get quite a number of answers. If I ask the elderly, if I ask the business people, were you satisfied with the statements of the minister? I am sure they will get a lot of questions or answers. And I believe that it's the reason why we are all gathered here, so that we can share our ideas and perspective on what the minister have actually said. concerning the future of this economy from where he is sitting. So thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this discussion. I really look forward to a lively discussion on it. Now, this is my take on the budget. First of all, let me lay down the macroeconomic backdrop within which the budget was framed. Now, as we can see, for the past 5 years, the economy of this country was not in a good state. Many times we are very quick to say, it's COVID. But the numbers do not lie. Where before COVID came, this economy was already in crisis. We were already struggling to make ends meet. And so when COVID came, it sort of just put the final nail on the coffin. But nonetheless, the minister has a duty to guide the future of this country economically. So the backdrop in which the minister budgeted and the minister and his team put together this budget was quite difficult. As you can see, we have just been reporting on average minus growth. So this growth does not augur well for budgeting or for planning. When you have an economy that is in such a shape, it is very, very difficult to budget. And like the director have alluded to, you see our economy for a very long time has not been able to create jobs. And if the economy is not creating jobs, it means that there is no additional income or revenue to the taxman. The fact that there were so many businesses that went out of business, there was a reduction in the profit revenue coming to government. And so all these things put together left the minister really with very, very limited space to work with. But nonetheless, he had to put something that should give hope, that should say a message that government is concerned. And so the budget was put under very, very difficult circumstances. And I think the minister must really be commended for that. Our biggest risk during this period of budgeting was, of course, COVID. And already from that perspective, we could see that the budget will not really deviate far away from what is needed in terms of fighting COVID. So already when the budget was being put together, we could already anticipate that the gist of the budget will definitely speak to COVID and other related issues. And so I thought that maybe this should provide us with a basis on how or where the minister was, or some of the things that the minister considered in preparation of this budget. But you can clearly see that the economy was in such a state that it made it very, very difficult for the minister to budget. Now, some of the parameters of the budget that came up within that framework, number one, is very important that we look at our revenue streams. You can clearly see that our revenue and grant, this is our main source of revenue from which the minister has to then decide what to spend where, is relatively weak, and it has been weakening over a period of time. And this is fairly because or in reflection of the economic situation. Government's main source of revenue is personal income tax, profit tax, corporate tax, and grants and a few other items. All of these items' ability to generate depends on the health of the economy. And for the past 5-10 years, the economy has not been in such a state to provide the much needed revenue for the government to plan. And so you can see that in terms of the percentage of revenue as a percent of GDP, it is really quite worrisome. You need to have a significant percent of revenue as a proportion of GDP high enough to really assure you or give you enough fiscal space to plan and budget. And the picture here clearly shows that the minister was really, or he really needed to do a lot of balancing act. And from the inside already you can see some of the issues that are making it very difficult for this revenue to look brighter are issues, some of them are structural issues, such as the thickness in the wage bill. Some of the issues are much larger than the country itself. And if you can see, they really didn't give him enough time or enough space to do what he would have wanted to do. But nonetheless, if you look on the expenditure side, coming from a very difficult time means that the government have to come to the rescue. Jobs were lost. Many people found themselves on the streets. A lot of the people that were already vulnerable, their situation worsened. And they had nowhere to look except for government. And therefore, you could expect that this budget, this time around, it will be an expansionary budget as well. I know that for the past 5 years, we have been talking about fiscal consolidation. It didn't happen because the needs were there and were growing, and therefore government really needed to increase expenditure regardless of the revenue stream. So if you look in terms of the absolute value of the budget, you can see that they are following an upward trajectory. This is in reflection really of the need for government to shield and mitigate the impact of things such as COVID, weak economic growth, external factors, and therefore government had no choice but to continue expanding in terms of expenditure. If you look at this side in conjunction with the left-hand side, you can easily reach a conclusion to say that where we are right now, government has really exhausted the fiscal space. There is no more room for additional expenditure because that has to be supported by a sufficient amount of revenue, which we do not have at this point in time. And therefore, as the minister really have to go much deeper, to really think much deeper on how to balance these two equations. And therefore, in terms of the budget, these are the two parameters that we can really use as the basis of our discussion. And if you can look and see, you can clearly see that the expenditure is way too higher or exceeds the revenue. Basic theory tells us that when this happens, then you have a balance which is not a zero balance. You have a negative balance. Our expenditure have exceeded our revenue. Of course, in a government setup, you can be tolerated to exceed your revenue to some stage, to some level. But you shouldn't allow it to grow extremely higher or wider because it limits your ability to spend when you want to absorb economic shocks. If our budget balance or deficit was not wide enough, government would have done quite a lot in terms of shielding people from COVID. But because the balance was already wide, government didn't have enough resources to pump in terms of rescuing packages. The space was already limited. And so that is why we've been advised that regardless of the fact that you are allowed to run some balances, make sure that they are within a minimal range so that you have enough space to react whenever there is a need to do. And therefore the 8.1 billion that government has to come to rescue us had to be borrowed from somewhere. This is because of that. And because government has got a social responsibility to serve and mitigate the impact. So in that regard, you can see here that the negative balance has been growing and widening for some time now. And this is really not a welcome development because it points to the fact that government is nearing a stage where they will come to a point where they are not able to respond on time and deep enough to issues such as COVID. COVID is probably not the last epidemic that we are going to experience. More are still to come, and so government needs to already be prepared, especially taking some lessons from the COVID. And so here are some of the issues that we are really pushing and perpetuating this balance are some of the structural issues that I've already alluded to, such as the huge public wage bill. I know that the huge public wage bill is one of the hardest issue right now, hottest issue right now. But the reality of the matter is that you cannot be sustainable when you have more than 50% of your expenditure or of your budget going to salaries. Yes, people need to get paid, but you need to have a situation where a large amount of your money goes to grow the cake that we can share later. And so this has become a reality in our budget. And it is really worrisome. The minister keeps on repeating, saying that government is quite concerned about the situation here. When you look on the right side, you can see that there's another undesirable situation that is beginning to come. And that is perpetuated by the fact that government has to find money somehow to finance the shortfall. There is no excuse in the world to justify the rate at which our debt is growing. But it must be understood from the fact that the huge deficit here does require financing. Of course, there are many options that government can consider, but given the situation currently that the whole world is finding itself, one of the lesser of the evils is to take up debt. We have been taking up debt for the past 10 years, and it has been managed. But when COVID came, it triggered a situation where we have to take up debt at a much faster rate. And that is why when a few years ago, like 10 years ago, when we said that we are going to exceed 50% of GDP in terms of debt, many people couldn't believe it. They said, but there's no way we're going to go to 50. But we have long passed our internal benchmark. We are now looking at 71%. What this basically means in layman's language, when you have 71% of debt as a percent of GDP, it simply means if your GDP, the value of your GDP is 178 billion, for example, 71% of that 178 billion is not yours. It is already committed. What can you do with 30% of the GDP? Coming from a situation of COVID, coming from a situation bad enough even before COVID, you cannot run the economy, you cannot sustain the economy only on 30% of your GDP, which is why this is a worrisome development. Of course, we can justify to say, but we have a deficit. But all these things are connected. If we can take care of this deficit, then we have taken care of the total debt. I am not going to go deeper in terms of who do we owe, how much, but what I want to highlight here is that one of the reasons, one of the triggers of the huge public debt is how we have been managing the bailouts to SOEs. It is a public secret that some of our SOEs, ever since they were created, they have never made a single profit. They have been relying on government for bailing out. And because this bailing out money has never resulted into anything, it kept on growing the debt until to the point where some of them have to be forcibly liquidated or shut down. This is a public secret, everyone knows this. But it must be put into context to say that it is one of the reasons why we're finding ourselves at this undesirable position in terms of debt, because that 71% of our GDP is already committed. I'm going to show you another graph in a little while, how bad that situation has become. Right. Now, this is our interest repayment profile. Remember that our government has not been able to generate the much needed revenue to budget from. And as a result, the balance have been financed mostly from borrowing. And we have been borrowing. Now, the interesting part about government borrowing is it is not like when you go to borrow from a microlender where they said you must pay at the end of the month. They can give you up to 5 years before you start to repay. And in that 5 years, it is to really give you an opportunity to put that money where it can generate so that you are able to pay back. What we have seen is that we do not know, I personally do not have access to all the government books where I can say this man has been going there. But what I can tell from the public, from the information in the public domain, is that the amount or the cost of our borrowing is beginning to bother us. Government is bothered by that and is highly, highly concerned. Why? before COVID, the repayment amount was only 11.3% of our revenue, meaning if we collect 50 billion, we were only paying 11.3% of that to our loans, which was okay. So that was in the region of 6 billion. With 6 billion, you can run probably 4 or 5 ministries. But we were okay with that. 2019, when COVID came, we had no choice but to increase our borrowing. On top of already the debt that we had, things started looking different. And so from there, the amount that we are paying back, the cost of this loan has shot up. We are now at 15.4% of the total revenue that is collected. Now remember, we are collecting only this amount, but within that amount, we have 15% already committed. So that leaves us with how much to budget from. And so this should give you a clear picture how serious this situation is and how serious it's going to become if nothing is going to be done to it. So when you look at an interest payment of 9.2 billion, you can run 6 young ministries in this. The minister himself alluded to this in his statement to say that this money could have been used to finance some public services. What that basically means is that some of the ministries have to forego their activities. And we are going to see, we can even go deeper to see which some of those ministries are. And you will be shocked to realize that some of those ministries are core ministries that are supposed to provide the much needed services to the vulnerable groups of our community and to the entire economy. So this really explains the seriousness of our debt situation as it stands. Right. Now, let's quickly look at the spending pattern. In the few minutes that I'm remaining with, I'm just going to talk you through what we are spending as a government. Now, when you talk of the budget, this year the minister have tabled a 70 billion budget. You are referring to the money that is going to be spent, not the money that's going to be collected. So our budget, when it is tabled, we are explained that it's going to be spent on all those various ministries which are called votes. Then those votes or those ministries are further categorized into 5 categories. Here I've only given you 4 because I've combined one category. You have a category of social sector. This is the sector that consists of ministries like your health, your education, your war veteran, your youth, those ministries that are directly dealing with social issues, your gender, your poverty. Well, we don't have means of poverty right now. It has been made with gender. Then you have your public service sector. This is where you find ministries like your defense, your security, and all of those. And then you have your economic sector, which includes ministries that are directly involved in economic activities, like your Ministry of Agriculture, your Ministry of Environment, Mines, Finance, etc., Works, Transport, ITC. Within this economic sector, you also find infrastructure sector, which is really the Ministry of Works and Ministry of Transport. And then you have your administrative sector, which involves your Office of the President, Prime Minister, National Assembly, etc., etc. This is to give you a summary of how the money is allocated. Now, if you look closely here, you will realize that it has always been a trend that our budget has been pro-social, because social sector has consistently been accounting for more than 40% of our entire budget, which is okay, because it shows you how serious government is in terms of providing social amenities. After all, we are a socialist government. And then if you look at public sector, it has come down slightly, but it's quite noticeable. About 18% of all the money is going to the public sector. This is where you find your Ministry of Defense. And if you recall, a few years ago, huge budget. Well, we didn't know that Ukraine was coming in Russia. So perhaps maybe. I'm just kidding. So I'm just saying, okay, that has been the allocation. And then you have your economic sector, which, when you split this, when you split the economic sector into pure economic sector and infrastructure, you realize that the proportions are quite small. This is mainly money that are going for capital projects, and they are quite small compared to the entire budget. Now, this raises concern. Why are we investing less in economic structure or in economic sector at the time that we need to grow the economy? So these are some of the policy debates that we can engage on. And then you've got your administrative, of course, it's quite the lowest of them all. But the concern really is on the negligible amount that is earmarked for economic sector and infrastructure. Now, when you look at the issue of having 9 billion already secured for repayment, you must simply ask yourself a question to say that if that money has to indeed go to pay the loans, definitely some ministry have to reduce. If you look here, you can clearly see from the economic sector, the amount, not the economic sector, the public sector has reduced in terms of proportion. The social sector slightly reducing. The administrative sector slightly reducing. There has not been a big bang, but this gradual reduction has got implications. So if we split, for example, the social sector, which consists of, if we split the social sector to just see if there are any ministries that have lost, we can see already from the graphs and also from the table that if you look in terms of education, arts and culture, in 2018, it commanded 44% of the entire social sector budget. Now it's at 43%. If you look at health and social service, of course, it has grown consistently, and this is simply because this is a frontline ministry when it comes to COVID. But if you look sports, youth and national service in 2019, 1.4, 1%, 0.01%. Now this is where the focus, according to government, is supposed to be. So if this budget are youth-centered, how come the proportion of money going to the youth ministry is shrinking? One of the answers is perhaps some of this money has been put aside to pay the loan. I'm just thinking, because somebody somehow must pay for this. One ministry somehow must pay for this. Then you have your veteran affairs, 3%, 2.5, 2.7. It's a reduction. You have your higher education training from 12%, 11, 9.7, 10, 10.2. Now, this 10.2, 10.2 might sound interesting, but this is where you find NASFAF. This is where you find NAS, where you find UNAM money. Now, when you are targeting the vulnerable youth, and you are only giving that 1.2 billion to NASFAF, what about the vulnerable youth who have not gone to university? What is in it for them? You are then say, okay, fine, those that are not at NASFAF, because NASFAF, remember, is also a social duty of government. But those are students that are already in universities. What about the youth that are in the villages? Then it's okay, fine. We have given 400 million to DBN to give as SME. So they go to DBN, some of these comrades, they can't even speak proper English to even write a form, and they are faced with so many questions and frustrated, and they go back, and then the whole 400 million, of course it will be used, but it will be used selectively. At the end of the day, the majority of the youth go back frustrated, even more angry. But then the budget is youth-centered. So you ask yourself a question to say, but where is the youth in all of this? Because if you look consistently for the past 5 years, it has been coming down except for 10.2, 10.1. This is really the boost that government gave to NASFAF. And we know the story at NASFAF. And then you have your gender equality, 14.9%, 6% growth is because of the merger of the two ministries. Poverty merged with gender. That's why the proportion to this ministry looks good. But if you split out, if you take out the poverty ministry, you can clearly see the reduction in their budget. You can clearly see some of the programs have to be reoriented. A point in case is the food bank is now converted to money. This money comes at a time where sugar price has just gone up, petrol price has just gone up. Okay, the list goes on. Macaroni has gone up. Probably Kapana. The last time I was at Kapana, for $50 I could not finish, but now $50 I just eat in seconds. So everything has just gone up. Then we are saying the food bank money is now cash. Go and buy. Buy what? Our inflation is 4.5%. So the value, the purchasing power of the money that has been converted into cash now, at the end of the day, remains really not very effective. So if you don't have to look at this in isolation, look at this in totality in terms of other programs to really see the whole picture. So here is, I just wanted to really show you that indeed there are some ministries that have lost as a result of the 9.2 billion that has been secured for the loans. So the minister himself said that this money could have been used to pay things in other ministries. So it does really connect with what the minister has said. If I can go back to the economic sector, I'm concerned about this as I wind up, Mr. Moderator. I'm concerned about this because this is the sector that is supposed to shoulder this economy. We are in a process, yes, and something has to be done now for the vulnerable. But what about tomorrow? After we have all been vaccinated, we will need to eat. We will need jobs. We will need to go to school. We will need to survive. What is the plan? Of course, we have various task force this, task force that, commendable. But where are the results? We need, well, I personally missed out on messages in that regard from the statement. So if you look at the economic sector, this is a sector that no matter what, it shouldn't be neglected or it shouldn't be sacrificed at the expense of COVID. So if you look at the ministry here that have lost and those that have gained, let me draw your attention to this blue line here. This is the percentage in relation to the entire economic sector budget. Not the entire budget, but the economic sector. So if you look into this, you'll see that this is the Ministry of Finance. From 2018, it has been 31% of the entire economic sector budget. And then 2019, shoop, 62, 63, 64, 65. If you go in the estimate, you see that it's 13 billion, 14 billion. It came all the way from 5 billion. Why did it jump suddenly to 14 billion? Because of the 9.2 billion. But that 9.2 billion, there is nothing economic about that. It's going to be paid. It's not going to be in Namibia. That's my concern. So if you have a situation here, so you can easily say, oh yeah, no, but how can you say that the ministry, the economic sector has lost? If you can say, oh, these numbers are big. Yeah, but this is 9.2 billion which is going to China, German and AFD or whatever we borrowed. So for me, there is really nothing economic here because this is a leakage. But it has amplified the amount that's going to the economic sector. Now, if you look in terms of the sectors or the industries that are really supposed to shoulder this economy, look at this one, transport. So you can see 26% in 2018, 15% in 2020, coming down to 10, 11.9, 11.8. This transport sector, this is the transport ministry, this is where you find your B1 road, your Karas and all those big infrastructure projects, which are good, but you can see the support is also going down, which in the long run, and when the support is going down, it means that people are not being employed by those road construction companies. There is no profit to pay tax on. And so the revenue stream continues to shrink and shrink. Look at the Minister of Work, flat. Yeah, the Minister of Works, it's so flat. No matter what, let there be money there, because this is where you can make an impact on your unemployment. If all of a sudden you can just get some money somewhere and build a big public work, people are employed, they get something. But it has been flat for the past 5 years. Look at agriculture, it came down also, our green scheme. It came down after the whole Nerpatal Dam completion. And then we ran out, I didn't want to say we ran out of ideas, but we ran out of steam. But of course, something is coming up. We heard that the green schemes have been marketed nicely in Dubai. But why? Okay, that's a discussion for another day. Okay, so you can clearly summarize, Mr. Moderator, that the gist of the issue here, the big issue for me, is that the much needed resources that could have gone to these key ministries or key industries have actually been diverted, legally of course, to pay the debts, leaving or sacrificing the services, the much needed services that could help the future of this economy. That's number one. Number two, the message of this budget being youth-oriented, it is not being supported by numbers. Apart from the speech and the statement, yes, which is quite commendable, but the numbers are not coming forth to say that this is a project for the vulnerable youth, not for NASFAP. Yes, we thank for NASFAP. But what about the brothers and sisters that now with this new curriculum, thousands have been added into the street. Those, they cannot go to SME banks, but not SME, to DBN. They don't qualify to NASFAP. Where do we take them? Maybe one thing I should mention here also on the works. The reason why works did not go down is because of the injection to build the stadium. The money here, which the minister referred or connected with the youth-oriented, is that the budget is youth-oriented in the sense that they have money to build the stadium for the youth. So a youth in Okalongo will have to drive to come and play soccer here. I don't know. But we needed those details. So from where I am sitting, really this budget requires robust debate and packing it so that we can get to some point where we understand to say, yes, indeed, this budget is youth-oriented or youth-centered, given ABCD allocation. And the numbers must be there to support it. So on this point, let me submit and hand over to you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you very much.